demographic that doesn't turn out the most. And because of that, a lot of the people in Washington right now, especially this administration, doesn't feel they have to be responsible for the future. So we have to hold them accountable. We have to make our voices heard. And today, I have a man here with me who not only wants to be responsible for making a better future for America, but wants to help hold everyone in Washington accountable too. Mr. Beto O'Rourke.
All right. Thank you. I think we may be able to do this without a microphone. Can you all hear me okay? Yeah. All right. Even better. Sebastian, thank you for the introduction. Taylor, this is our second visit to Las Vegas. You were there to help us on our first one. Thanks for being part of this as well. Everyone who's part of the UNLV community, please take note of the hat. And also know that we are grateful for the opportunity to be here with you. Very, very important that we have a chance to come here, especially given the fact that yesterday we were in Reno at the University of Nevada, Reno up there, so I want to make sure that we came here as well. Someone made sure that I switched out hats before I came in. A huge honor to join you, and I'm here most importantly to listen to you, to answer the questions, hear your comments, criticism, concerns, ideas, ways in which I can be a better candidate and better reflect your stories, your interests, the things that are most urgent to you. By way of introduction, I'm from El Paso, Texas. Is somebody else's also?
No, I'm from Houston. I live in Houston.
Right on. Just 12 hours down the road from El Paso, I-10.
My wife's from Las Cruces.
There you go. Yeah, our sister city in New Mexico. So this community in many ways reminds me of home. Me encanta. I feel in the climate, in the air, in the people, in the kindness, in the biculturalism and bilingualism that I see and find and enjoy in Las Vegas, something that reminds me very much of El Paso, Texas. So it's a huge honor. Es un honor estar aquí con ustedes hoy. So El Paso, you may or may not know, one of the largest binational communities in the world with Ciudad Juarez. It's the largest binational community with Juarez in the Western Hemisphere. So 3 million from 2 countries speaking 2 languages, 2 histories, 2 cultures are joined, not separated, by the Rio Grande River, forming something far greater, far more powerful than the sum of their parts or the number of people involved. And not unconnected to that, El Paso, Texas is one of, if not the safest cities in the United States of America. Not despite the fact that we are a city of immigrants, but because we are a city of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees, and that profoundly positive message about the power of immigrants, not just to contribute economically or culturally, but to our safety and security is needed now more than ever, because we've got a president who describes Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, who talked about asylum seekers who, and you know this, have traveled 2,000 miles with their kids on foot, atop a train known as La Bestia or the Beast, to come here last week outside of Brownsville, Texas. 3-year-old boy shows up alone, unescorted, with a phone number written on his shoe. No parent sends their 3-year-old out there unless that's the last thing that they can do to hopefully save his life. But our president calls them an infestation. He describes them as animals. He wants to make us afraid, keep us angry, move us apart from one another. What we need to know and understand is that our differences make us stronger. We can't just tolerate one another, respect those differences. We've got to embrace them and understand that that's the genius of this country. Perhaps one of the only nations on the face of the planet defined not by race or ethnicity, but by this idea that we are all created equal to equal opportunity. And I see that flourishing here in Las Vegas. I see it flourishing in El Paso. I see it everywhere I go across the United States. I think that at this very divided moment, where we are defining ourselves by those differences, and they can be the number of generations that you can count your family in this country, whether you just got here yesterday. It can be to whom you pray, who you love, your geography, whether you live in a rural or an urban community. That stuff's going to keep us from doing the big work in front of us right now, like meeting the challenge of the fact that there are millions of our fellow Americans who cannot see a doctor, cannot afford their prescriptions, cannot take their child to a therapist, cannot be well enough to live to their full potential and contribute to their maximum capacity to our shared greatness. I see these moms who demand action. They can share with us that we lost more than 30,000 of our fellow Americans last year. No other modern country comes even close to this level of bloodshed and carnage. And it's not that we lack for resources. We only lack the political will to pass universal background checks and to stop selling weapons of war designed to kill people as effectively and efficiently in as great a number as possible into our communities, where they show up at our concerts and in our churches and in our schools and in our lives, and they take the lives of those in our lives. An economy where far too many are working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. One of the phrases that I learned in our last visit to Las Vegas is one job should be enough. For you to focus on yourself and your family, be able to read to your child before the first day of school. The fact that so many parents cannot do that right now might explain the fact that at 5 years old in a kindergarten classroom, some kids are 10 months back in reading comprehension, 12 months back in math. Their parents did not have the luxury to read to them, to spend time with them, because they're working too many jobs just to put food on the table and keep that roof over their head. Sebastian told us a little bit about his story. The people of the future, I hope, will not be able to believe that in this year, 2019, more than 1 million of our fellow Americans lived under a persistent fear of being deported back to a country that for all intents and purposes they do not know, whose language they may not speak, where they may no longer have family, where if we send them back at extraordinary cost, and if they are successful against those long odds, their success will benefit that place, not this place, not Las Vegas, not Nevada, not the United States of America. Again, we're only lacking the political will to bring them fully out of the shadows, to ensure that they can contribute to their maximum potential as U.S. citizens, given the fact that they're already as American as anyone else in any way that matters. And then maybe this last, most important challenge that we face. The scientists are conclusive on the fact that this planet has warmed 1 degree Celsius just since 1980. And that warming is not caused by God. It's not a natural phenomenon. It is in response to our emissions, to our excesses, to our inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the truth. And it is already causing problems, taking property and lives throughout this country. We were just in Iowa. The Missouri River broke its banks, flooded farms that were already underwater in terms of debt. And now those fields and that livestock and what has been stored up for sale is also underwater and spoiled. We saw 4 times the runoff into the Missouri River basin this year, the greatest runoff since we've been making records about the Missouri River. Not unlike Houston, Texas, that saw 58 inches of rain fall from the sky in 2017, the landfall record for one storm for as long as we've been keeping records in the United States of America. And that was the 3rd 500-year flood. These floods, these storms, these droughts, these wildfires are in part caused by us and will become exponentially, existentially worse if we do not act in the 10 years that the scientists say that we still have time to free ourselves from a dependence on fossil fuels, transition to renewable energy, take our rightful role on the world stage, convening the other powers of the planet before it is too late. In other words, given the challenges that we have, it's going to take all of us. We cannot meet these challenges with half measures or with only half the country. I know from experience, serving on city council in El Paso, serving as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, in the minority every single year that I was there, getting things done by finding common ground with Republican colleagues, running for Senate in the state of Texas, which was thought to be so reliably red, it wasn't worth the time of a Democrat to show up. And yet at the end of 2018, we won more Democratic votes, or more votes for a Democrat than any Democrat in the state's history. Won 500,000 votes from those who also voted for our Republican Tea Party governor. In other words, we found the common ground on health care, on climate, on immigration, on gun violence, on reproductive rights for all of us, regardless of the differences. And at this very divided time in our country, that's what we need. Not only to defeat Donald Trump in November of 2020, but to ensure that in January of 2021, this country is ready to pursue our priorities before it is too late for all of us who are here and for every generation that follows. For those reasons, I'm running to serve you as the next President of the United States of America, and I'm grateful for the chance to be here. So thank you. Les agradezco. And what I'd love to do is, if you've got a question or a comment or an idea, raise your hand. I'll call on you. Cynthia will bring a microphone if we can't hear you, and we'll just get as many voices into the conversation.
Say
Sir.
your name. Okay.
Hello, my name is Trey Arline. I'm with the Starling Grocery Press, which is the student newspaper here at UC.
Great.
When it comes down to the issue of white supremacy, I looked at the numbers and saw that since 9/11, 74% of terrorist attacks and hate crimes have been committed by white supremacist groups.
Can I hand you this? I think it might be a little tough for the folks in the back.
Can you guys hear me?
Thank you.
Do you
Yeah.
want me to repeat the question? Yes. Stop?
Please, yeah.
My name is Trey Arline. I'm with the Starling Grocery Press, which is our student newspaper. I wanted to ask you about your candidacy's position and what your position would be as President of the United States in regards to treating white supremacy as a national security threat.
Yeah.
When it comes down to terrorism since 9/11, 74% of terrorist attacks in the United States have been committed by white supremacists and not so much Muslim extremists as people are more inclined to believe.
Right.
People may not want to take that into account, and a lot of presidents have kind of passed by on that issue. And I wanted to ask what your position on taking that as a threat might be as president.
Thanks for the question. Really, really appreciate it. I'll begin with our current president and work back from there. A man in the highest position of public trust and power who describes Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis as very fine people, who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, who called asylum seekers an infestation or animals, despite what we know to be the truth of very vulnerable families seeking asylum and salvation and safety and protection in this country. Not only does it offend our ears and our sensibilities, it also leads to practices and policies and actions that will define not just that one man or his political party, but all of us in this country. Putting kids in cages, a rise in hate crimes every single one of the last 3 years in this country, Islamophobia rampant in the United States, exacerbated even more by a tweet that the president sent out a few weeks ago conflating Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who happens to be a Muslim member of Congress, with the attackers on 9/11, an incitement not just to hatred, but I would argue to violence. A country, and this now goes beyond one president, one person, and just who we are as a country from our very foundation. A country whose wealth was built by those who were kidnapped in West Africa, brought here on the Middle Passage, built this country from the ground up with no prospect of being able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. Succeeding generations in communities of color kept down in Jim Crow, in segregation, in suppression that continues to this day. A criminalization of communities of color, 2.3 million of our fellow Americans behind bars. No country puts more of their own people away than ours does. Home of the brave, land of the free. And they're disproportionately comprised of color. So this is not just one person, although he's among the worst that we've ever had in this country. This is our country right now. And we need to understand the consequences of a failure to stare squarely in the face the history of slavery and segregation and suppression in the United States of America. And not just calling the president out, which we do here today, and not just in our administration, making sure that we begin to repair the damage done by telling the true story of the United States, its foundation, and continuing oppression to this day, but by making sure that we begin to rectify some of the damage done. When I talked about that classroom where 5-year-olds in some cases are 10 months behind in reading comprehension, if they are children of color, they are 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled, meaning that the schoolhouse to jailhouse pipeline begins not in high school, but begins in kindergarten, at a very tender, vulnerable, defenseless age for these kids. A war on drugs has become a war on people, and some people more than others. These are the signals that our country, through its history, has sent to others, and people are picking up on that, made even worse again by this current president. So calling it out, making sure that we address inequity where it is in our country, in our educational system, in our healthcare system, in our economy, as well as our criminal justice system, is how we begin to address this. And then lastly, making sure that we do not focus 5,500 U.S. service members on the border, that we do not create paranoia and fear about asylum seekers, or try to ban all Muslims from entering the country, as the president did on the day he signed that executive order in February of 2017. The mosque in our home state of Victoria, Texas, was burned to the ground. Not only is this hateful and does it incite violence, it takes our eye off the problem where it is. And you mentioned white terrorism, something that we have failed to effectively address in this country. Thanks for the question. Appreciate it.
Okay, here's our next question.
Hello, my name is Victoria. I'm a journalism student here at UNLV, and I was wondering what you're gonna do to help out with student loans. I mean, we have Elizabeth Warren who is trying to do like debt forgiveness. What are your plans?
Yeah. Thanks for being here and for your choice of profession or career, needed now more than ever. You're the best defense against tyranny, not the enemy of the people.
Amen.
So thank you. And you raise a really important issue. More than $1.5 trillion in outstanding student loan debt now. The average graduating college senior will have $40,000 on their back. We're seeing a default rate of 10%, meaning that folks are getting crushed by what they are carrying right now. And it's a drag on them, their families, but it's also a drag on our economy. So making the case that we have a shared interest in the solution, which should begin with stopping the digging of the hole. So make community college free for everybody so no one takes on a dime of debt to better themselves. Make sure that four-year public serving universities are debt free for those who attend them so that we don't add more to the 1.5 trillion. And those who are already carrying it, if you make a commitment to public service, teaching in school or serving in public education, if you want to fill one of the 45,000 clinical vacancies in the VA to take care of veterans who stood up and put their life on the line for this country, I want to make sure that we wipe clean your debt. And then at a minimum, we refinance what you have right now so it's more affordable for you, more likely that you're going to be able to pay it back and be able to move on with your life. I want to make sure that when we have this conversation, however, we do not exclude those who choose not to go to college, who pursue a different career path. Want to make sure that apprenticeships are available to young people and older people who are returning to the workforce or whose jobs have been automated out of existence. I want to invest in everyone, not just those who choose or can go to college, but everyone who wants to better themselves, whether it's through joining a union, whether it's through going to a college. I want to make sure that we can all reach our full potential. Thanks for the question.
All right,
Appreciate
here's
it.
our next question.
Yeah, hey.
Hi, my name is Nancy, and I am a community college teacher in California.
Great.
And you're going to ask what I teach. I teach reading to adults.
Wow.
And 70% of our students come in reading below a 12th grade level. So my first question is, what can we do about public education? And then my second question is for my sister-in-law, Barbara, who just did really well with the strike and from LAUSD. She's a teacher in LAUSD. She's really afraid of charter schools.
Yeah.
So could you talk a little bit about how charter schools hopefully will not ruin the public school system and what we can do for education?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thank you for your choice of profession as well, making sure that you're connecting people with their full potential. You ask about public school education and some of the consequences of a disinvestment in education and in learning. I mentioned starting at a very young age, 4 or 5 years old in kindergarten, you already have kids who are way behind in reading comprehension. And as I think you're experiencing, in many cases they never catch up. There's never a moment where you can press pause and everybody stands still so that you can get to the same level of comprehension. One of the ways to address this is to start public school education not at 4 or 5 years old in kindergarten, but universally at 3 or 4 years old in pre-K. It's not cheap, doesn't come easy, but but it's an investment that has proven to produce a return over time. I think it's something like 9 to 1. For every dollar you put in, you get $9 out from that pre-K classroom. If we invest in teachers, and in Texas, half of school teachers and educators, cafeteria workers, counselors, librarians, school bus drivers are working a second or a third job just to make ends meet. It might explain why so many public school educators are dropping out of the profession and choosing another industry or another career, because they literally cannot afford to answer that call. When we make it more difficult on them with high pressure, high stakes, standardized tests that in no way effectively measure that teacher's performance or that child's capacity to learn, we dissuade more teachers from entering the profession. We were just in South Carolina recently, and 1/4 of new public school educators drop out of that profession within the first year, 50% within the first 5 years. So if you think about everything that we've invested in those public school educators, we lose out on that when they don't stay in the profession. So paying more, especially in those states like Texas and like Nevada, right to work states where you do not have the power to collectively bargain, making sure that if you cannot advocate for yourself collectively, that we are advocating for you at the federal level and from the highest position of public trust. That is extraordinarily important. And then listening to teachers when it comes to defining what we do in those schools. All 3 of my kids go to traditional public schools that are achieving excellence in dual language education, meaning on Monday they'll have their math class in Spanish, on Tuesday they'll have their math class in English. They are reading, they are learning, they are thinking, they are calculating, they're existing in both languages and in both worlds, making the most of this binational community. You know who came up with that? Public school educators in El Paso who designed the curriculum. You asked about charters. In the original idea that produced charter schools, it came from teachers' unions. This was supposed to be a laboratory of innovation, the benefits from which would proceed to be shared with all public schools. So with that idea in mind, if we encourage nonprofit charter schools that have public governance because they're using public taxpayers, who have a mission and a mandate to share what they come up with the rest of the public school system, I think there's real value in charters. There is not in for-profit or private charter schools, but we can, even if we are to continue to do that, we cannot charter our way out of public school challenges. That means an investment in the classroom and in our educators. So thank you for the question.
Next question, straight back here.
Gotcha.
Hi, my name is Adele Doctor. I work at the foundation here at Humanity. And I'm just gonna speak like I hear people talking, you know,
Please.
that I know. How are you gonna beat Trump when he has no, I mean, it's like Teflon. You can't even use justice against him. And how are you gonna debate him? Because he just calls names.
Right.
And he acts so childish that but people think that he doesn't have the poll numbers, but people see that as strength somehow, you know. But I know Democrats have a lot of groups that divide us. And so we got to come together on one ticket and get numbers out. But it seems like we can't do, it seems like we're like Charlie Brown with Lucy. The Republicans are always, snatching the ball away. How can you encourage more people to come out and how can we beat this guy?
Yeah. So part of the reason that I in introducing myself, talk about the campaign that we just ran in Texas is because not only did we win more votes than any Democrat in Texas history, not only did 500,000 Republicans who voted for a Tea Party governor also vote for us, though we had a very progressive agenda. We won independence in Texas for the first time in a decade. But on top of all that, además, 500% increase in young voter turnout in Texas. A state that had been gerrymandered along lines of race and ethnicity was able to transcend the barriers, and it now counts. It's in play, including its 38 electoral votes. To put some math into my answer to your question about how we win. And then your really excellent point about the president's ability to connect with people using fear and intimidation and the bullying and the meanness and the racism, if we want to call it out for what it is. What's the answer to that? I think when we define ourselves by our ambitions, the things that we want to do, when everyone can see a future for themselves in this country, regardless of the differences, including party, then we begin to win elections, even against someone like Donald Trump, who defies every single institution and invites attacks upon our democracy, including the participation of a foreign government in the 2016 election. And then, as you just said, is able to attempt to obstruct justice, and so far has been able to get away with it without any real consequences. Our job, and now whoever the nominee is, it may be me, it may be someone else, but whoever she or he is, to get behind them to ensure that they can win, and win by providing the clearest possible contrast. If we succumb to that kind of stuff and try to stoke divisions and differences, we may just get more of the same with Donald Trump. The choice has to be absolutely clear. And so not only in the way that I want to serve, but the way in which I'm campaigning, bringing everybody in, talking about those things that we want to do together. That's my answer to your question. I'm glad that you asked. Thanks. Appreciate it.
All right, here's our next question.
Got you.
Good to meet you. My name is Steve, and I'm an LAUSD parent who took his daughter she took me out of my work to bring me here from Los Angeles.
Right on.
LAUSD school to come here to see you speak. And I'm also a charter school founder.
Okay.
And called Green Dot, and those schools have union partnerships. They're wall-to-wall California Teachers Association schools, and in fact started a school with Randy Weingarten in the South Bronx
Oh, wow.
called University Prep, which you have to come see. The
We'd love
average
to.
teacher makes $108,000 a year. Over charter schools, bring them for school.
Oh, well, yes, thank you. Appreciate that. And thanks for adding those facts to the conversation. I think when we pay teachers, public school educators, their worth, not only are they going to be able to afford to just have one job, but their entire focus is going to be on unlocking the lifelong love of learning within those kids. And once we do that, there's no stopping those kids, there's no stopping us as a country. So thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate
All right,
it.
here we go.
Hi Beto, my
Hi.
name is Salome Levy, and I'm currently a high school student here in Las Vegas, and I'm part of the National State Liaison for the U.S. Youth Climate Strike.
Oh, right on.
So on March 15th, we organized hundreds of strikes around the nation in response to the inaction towards climate change. We are going to strike again on May 3rd, and recently, we actually started a petition to have 2020 presidential candidates to support a climate debate. Would you be one of the candidates to support this debate? And if so, what would you say to other presidential candidates?
Yeah, okay. Salome, thank you for being here, and thank you for your advocacy. Thank you for leading in March, and thank you for leading going forward. You are a reminder to all of us that every big change, every important moment in this country has in part been led by young people. The sacrifices so often purchased by people your same age. I think about the greatest generation coming out of the Great Depression and in fighting the greatest existential threat that we had to Western democracy, and so many your age literally giving their lives for this country. The Freedom Riders in the Deep South in the 1950s, 1960s, those who integrated places of public accommodation, they looked like you in terms of age, they didn't look like me in terms of age, right? They weren't people who were holding positions of power. They were people who forced those who were holding positions of power or who sought power to listen to them. Shocked the conscience of this country. On gun violence, those who led the marches for our lives, the reason the House of Representatives just passed universal background checks about 6 weeks ago is they're very fine women and men who serve in Congress, but they are responding to the public pressure that they feel. And so on climate, we talked about the existential nature of that threat and the loss of life and property and communities that we are already seeing around the world right now. Your leadership is going to guarantee that we do something while we still have time to do that. So we want to look at the details of the debate that you proposed, but I like that idea. So let us see that, and I can't see why we wouldn't want to participate in that. Know that I understand the gravity of the task before us. We're going to have to, as soon as humanly possible, get to net zero greenhouse gas emissions, which means freeing ourselves from fossil fuels, which dominate this country and our economy right now, investing more in solar and in wind, helping rural communities to do their part as well. There are farmers who, if we allow them to make a profit doing this through the Farm Bill, are going to do everything they can to pull some of that carbon out of the air to help us get to net zero. But it's going to take all of us working together. And so I'm grateful that you're leading. Looking forward to following up with you on the details of the invitation. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Right behind you, and I know there's a lot of hands up. I'll try to get to as many people as I can.
Thanks.
Hey, Mr. O'Rourke. So I'm an educator, just like y'all, like I mentioned before, and you mentioned school accountability frameworks that started with No Child Left Behind, and are still kind of carrying on at the state level with Every Student Succeeds.
Yeah.
So that accountability that measures standardized tests instead of teacher performance and actual student achievement, like it is hurting schools. And simultaneously in the Department of Education, a lot of the work has been done to protect Title IX, and equitable discipline and education work has been walked back, and it's going to take years to actually restore that effort. What do you plan to do to reform school accountability, and what do you plan to do to fight for equity in schools?
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. So our kids now are in 6th, 5th, and 2nd grades, and the night before the big standardized test that they take, STAR test, they're anxious, they can't sleep, they're scared, and I got to think in some ways, because Amy and I are not putting that pressure on them, I got to think their teacher, their instructor in the classroom understands that so much of her evaluation will depend on how Ulysses and Molly and Henry perform. And so why are we putting somebody who's already under the burden of student loan debt, who already may fear that because we haven't passed universal background checks that a gunman might walk into that classroom, who already in Texas on average is taking $800 out of his or her pocket to pay not just for decorations or school supplies, but for meals for kids who may be on free and reduced breakfast and lunch, but do not have a dinner to go home to. Maybe paying for a new set of clothes for a kid who's shown up in the same jeans and t-shirt and chones Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. By Friday, there's a new set of clothes for that kid, because that teacher understands that their ability to learn is tied to their sense of self-worth, their dignity, their ability to reflect that they have value. To then have high pressure, high stakes, standardized tests that in no way effectively measure what that teacher is doing, what that child's potential is, with so many local variations. In El Paso, connected to Ciudad Juarez, so many of the kids arrive in that classroom monolingual Spanish speakers who add so much to our education, but may not be captured on a high stakes, high pressure standardized test. What I would prefer is that you mentioned the evolution from No Child Left Behind to the Every Student Succeeds Act. The next iteration of federal public education policy must have your input, the input of public school educators in El Paso, in LA as well. And what I hear from them, I have yet to meet a teacher who does not want to do better, who does not want some feedback on how he or she is performing, but understands it does not come through that test. They want somebody to actually be present in the classroom, to observe and provide feedback and guidance and instruction and investment in their continuing education. None of this comes cheap, and you just made the point about what some educators are making in some parts of the country, but I guarantee you we will make every dollar of that back and then some, because it's an investment that pays dividends over the lifetime of those students and the rest of us as a beneficiary. So I would love to work with you and others to make sure that best practices come from the educators who are actually producing them in the first place. Thank you for what you're doing. Appreciate it.
Okay, here's our next question.
Hi, I'm Eduardo Rosso with the Scarlet and Gray Free Press. Also a journalism student and an anthropology student. My question is, what do you plan on doing about automation, as automation is the leading cause of people losing their jobs?
Yeah, Eduardo, thank you. I mentioned earlier, when we're talking about community college, very often we envision a 17 or an 18-year-old who's going to pursue that associate's degree, or a 16 or 17-year-old who's able to get an associate's degree while they're still in high school at some of these early college high schools that are another innovation of public schools around the country. And that's an important part of our focus, but we should also think about the mom or the dad who's been raising their kids and wants to return to the workforce, that person who may be in their 40s, 50s, or 60s, whose job has just been automated out of existence, and needs a new set of skills or a trade that they can learn, these community colleges and making sure that access to them is free and that cost is not a barrier, and also unions and the ability to learn a trade or a craft without taking on a dime of debt as an apprentice will ensure that we meet the challenge that you just described, and one that we have here in Las Vegas and throughout Nevada. I was actually just meeting with unions and some of the building trades. We are opening more jobs today than we have people to fill them, because we're not connecting the training and the education with the high skill, high value, very highly paid jobs that are being produced in this country. We see people in Texas going into debt, earning a welder's certification, who, if we connected them with a community college or with an apprenticeship in a union, would ensure that they are placed in that job that's open right now and they do not take on debt. So I understand your concern about automation. I still think, and in fact, I think the facts bear this out, that we're creating more jobs today than we are connecting people to them with. And that problem that I mentioned earlier of 2 or 3 jobs that some people are working, that can be connected with the training and the education that we are proposing. So thanks for asking the question. Appreciate it.
And if I didn't get to you, I'm so sorry. We only have time for 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you.
Hi, my name is Maya Schmidt. I'm a military wife and the vice president of HCASA, which is a Healthcare Administration Student Association, and a servant of this community.
Right on.
So I very much care about the health of our community, and obviously in the United States we spend the most when it comes to money towards medical care, but we have the least when it comes to best medical outcomes out of the world. What, in addition to making drugs more affordable, do you plan on doing to assist with that problem? Because it is a huge one.
Yeah, thank you for Maya for asking the question. Thank you for your service. We know in every military family, every member of that family is serving, and so we are grateful to you and for everything else that you're doing for the community. I was just rereading this article that really made an impression on me. It was published in USA Today a couple of months back. And it was about people in this country dying of diabetes. And the story begins with a nurse in Ohio who was in between jobs and was rationing her insulin, trying to stretch it along with whatever money she had until something had to give. And it was, in the end, her life. How can the wealthiest, most powerful country on the face of the planet be witnessing that in our communities today? And the article goes on to explain that in 1922, so now almost 100 years ago, insulin was developed in Canada and sold for $3, I think, to the Canadian government or to one of the universities. And those who developed it had no interest in profit or royalties. They just wanted to save lives. And so why is it unaffordable today? Why do we not allow Medicare to bargain to reduce the prices that we pay? Why don't we allow you to buy from Canada if you want to? And that's just on prescription medications. Mental health care. So many of our states, the largest provider of mental health care services is the county jail system. To the point that those with mental health care needs sometimes, and this isn't the right thing and we shouldn't see this, but I'm going to make the point that they get arrested on purpose to go to jail, which is the one place they can be guaranteed care right now. That is not right. A maternal mortality crisis in this country, in the state of Texas, we're at the epicenter of it, 3 times as deadly for women of color. We've shut down so many of our family planning clinics that we've made it so hard not just to obtain a legal abortion. We made it so hard to get a cervical cancer screening, to see a family planning provider, to see a doctor or provider of any kind, that we're losing women at a record rate right now. And so the answer to all of this is guaranteed, high quality, universal health care for every child, for pay for care today. To use one other story of a diabetic patient, one that we met in Laredo, Texas last year. 27 years old, had seen a doctor once in his lifetime. That doctor diagnosed his diabetes and his glaucoma and said that he would be dead before the age of 40 on this current path. What we know is that that young man, though he cannot see a doctor today, as he gets closer to death, will be taking himself to the emergency room. The outcomes will not be as good. The care will be exponentially more expensive, and he will not be able to pay for it, but you will and I will, if we're lucky enough, and that's all you are if you have insurance, lucky enough to have insurance in the premiums that you pay or the taxes that you provide to your local governments to provide that indigent care. So investing that money in all of us is an investment in allowing us to rise to our full potential, be well enough employer-sponsored insurance and like it because it works for them and their families to choose to keep that or choose to move to Medicare at some point in the future. That is the quickest, surest way to get to that goal of guaranteed, high-quality, universal care. Thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
This is going to be our last question.
Okay. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Beto. So I work for the Public Education Foundation right across the street. Just wanted to say thanks for all your comments on public education. Our organization helps to pilot and incubate good ideas to help benefit the system and create better education overall. So appreciate all that.
Thank you.
I wanted to know, just on a general sense, what is your North Star issue? What is the thing that gets you out of bed every day, that makes you the most passionate, that's going to set you apart from the other candidates?
Oh. So, when I think about my kids, every one of these issues is going to impact their lives in one form or another. But there's only one that is going to potentially cost them or the generations that follow them their ability to live on this planet. If we allow the earth to continue to cook, 1 degree already, on track for another 3 or 4 degrees Celsius, it's going to wash away entire cities. Where we are in the desert Southwest will no longer support human life. The 400,000 apprehensions on the southern border, some of them fleeing drought in the northern triangle of Central America, that'll be nothing compared to the apprehensions we see when some countries in the Western Hemisphere can no longer support human life. We are seeing deaths right now. We are seeing wars. The civil war in Syria followed the greatest drought, I think, on record in that country. Successful. But I'll just say this, and I'll end with this, as I began. This cannot